Okay. Okay, I'll leave it to you.
Okay, thanks. Udah? Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi taala wabarakatuh. Dan selamat pagi. Yang berbahagia Profesor Emeritus Tan Sri Dato Dzulkifli Abdul Razak, Rector Universiti Islam Antarabangsa Malaysia. Yang berbahagia Puan Sri Masrah Abidin. Yang berbahagia Datuk Sri Dr. Anwar Fazal, Pengerusi Think City. Yang berusaha Encik Muhammad bin Abdullah, Ketua Timbalan Pendaftar Kanan di Pejabat Naib Chancellor Universiti Sains Malaysia, yang berbahagia Puan Zanita Zakaria, Timbalan Bendahari Kanan Universiti Sains Malaysia, yang berusaha Encik Muhyiddin Abdul Kadir, Presiden Persatuan Pengguna Pulau Pinang, dan seterusnya yang berbahagia datuk-datuk, tuan-tuan dan puan-puan yang saya hormati sekalian. On behalf of all of us at the Center for Policy Research and International Studies, Universiti Sains Malaysia, I would like to take this opportunity to extend a very warm welcome to all of you to the second SM Muhammad Idris Memorial Lecture. Before I proceed to introduce our eminent speaker, please allow me to say a few words about SM Muhammad Idris. The late Martin Kaur said that SM Muhammad Idris was one of a kind and was a force of nature in more ways than one. Martin went on to say that SM Muhammad Idris cared deeply for the poor and downtrodden, and he had gotten the Consumers Association of Penang and Sahabat Alam Malaysia to tirelessly fight for the rights and welfare of fishermen, farmers, smallholders, estate and factory workers, squatters, house tenants, the indigenous people of Sabah and Sarawak, the Orang Asli, and foreign workers. This started decades before the bottom billion and B40 became a popular term. Without a shadow of doubt, SM Muhammad Idris was a legend, a public intellectual, and he redefined the guiding philosophy of consumer movement globally. It is my great honor to introduce our speaker for this morning's lecture. Yang berbahagia Professor Emeritus Tan Sri Dato Dzulkifli Abdul Razak is a towering Malaysian with a long list of accomplishments. He is currently the Rector of International Islamic University, Malaysia, and perhaps more importantly, he was the Vice Chancellor of Universiti Sains Malaysia from the year 2000 until 2011. He is the immediate past president of International Association of Universities, a UNESCO-affiliated organization based in Paris. He was the convener of Regional Center of Expertise on Education for Sustainable Development based in USM. Professor Tan Sri Dato Dzulkifli Abdul Razak is the first Asian recipient of the prestigious 2017 Gilbert Medal. He is a fellow of the Academy of Sciences, Malaysia, the World Academy of Arts and Science, and the World Academy of Islamic Management. He was an invited speaker at 2015 Nobel Dialogue in Sweden and a speaker at Nobel Prize Dialogue in South Korea in October 2021. Recently, he was appointed as a member of Qatar Foundation Higher Education Strategy Advisory Panel. Without further ado, I would like to call upon Yang berbahagia Tan Sri Dato Dzulkifli Abdul Razak to present his lecture on the futures of higher education. Tan Sri.
Thank you very much, Dr. Azim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin wassalatu wassalamu ala mursalin sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajmain. La haula wala quwwata illa billah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi taala wabarakatuh. Greeting of peace and a very good morning. I do not know how to start this. I feel very humble and I feel very small in front of you. Now that I'm back to my own alumni wearing my own USM t-shirt, the last one that I got. My colleague from UIA wasn't too happy about this, but but nevertheless, I would like to bring back myself into this university maybe 40 years ago when I was a student in 1971. At that particular time, Professor Sharum was my guiding principal. I know at one time he called me up and said, your research is not complete, what's happening, you know, and we have got this kind of a dialogue. And later on, I met Dato Anwar Fazal, and then Uncle Idris and Muhyiddin and the rest of it. These are all my teachers beyond just this university. And in fact, I would admit that I learned a lot more from them than my own classroom and my own lectures. 1970s were the days where students were really tested as far as their commitment is concerned. There's a lot of issues, social issues that we were engaged with. Being a science student is something which is alien to me, but yet I managed to learn what is important outside there. Sometimes it's more important than the classroom. So I want to say much about Uncle Idris, but whatever I said, it will not match what he has done. And therefore, I just want to pay my respect to him, and I think I've learned a lot from him. The days when we were asked to give him interviews to him, it added up that he interviewing us and say what is wrong with the university. That I think shapes my mind, and if you see me now, I think half of what my thinking is the making of Uncle Idris himself, and I cannot thank him enough. And this is my kind of contribution to the little that I could to relive his memory, with the hope that I think his memory will be part and parcel of this university, being science and being university in Penang. I think there is also a duty for us to lift up to his expectation of what the university should be. So I will share with you some of this experience that I've got way back when I was a student, and trying to put this in a perspective that perhaps we can benefit from it. None of this is new. It's just a reassembling of facts and putting it together, and maybe trying to realign it with what we want to do as far as academia is concerned, as far as education is concerned, and as far as us as Malaysian and as a global citizens is concerned. So I would start off with a kind of a trepidation. If there's anything wrong with this, please forgive me, and we can talk about it at the end of the day. As you have been told that I'm now with IIUM, and I would also want to acknowledge IIUM has taught me a lot in terms of what knowledge and what education is all about. When I finished with USM, I thought that was it, being the apex university, but being in UIA for the last 4 years, now coming up to my 5th and 6th year, there's a lot more that I think we need to put in. There's a lot more that we need to add on, because the world has been redefined, has been defined in such a way that we human beings are no longer human beings the way we know it. And I think this is the essence that I'm trying to bring back and say, how can we create this complete human being that we are supposed to be, and education is supposed to help us. It's not about the world, it's not about human capital, it's about being human, and how do you put this into perspective. And that's the task that we have now as far as IIUM is concerned. The big word for IIUM is Rahmatan lil Alamin, mercy to all. Despite being an Islamic university, it is not about Islam and Muslims alone. It is about all religions and all people. It's about all life and all creation that God gives us. And therefore, the ambit of IIUM is bigger than what we know. It's not about ranking. It's not about Penang. It's not about any community per se. It's about humanity as such. And how do you translate that into education, given the narrow perspective we are pushed into, and how do you break into the new perspective moving on in the next 40 years. We will be celebrating our 40 years this year, and we hope that will be an inflection point of what education should be in Malaysia, if not the world over. Okay, let me start off by going through, I hope I can hit the right button, yeah. By giving in the context. I think the context we are all very familiar with. The context of uncertainty, the context of ambiguity, the context of chaos. The word VUCA explains that. And all of us are now not knowing where to go and what to do. Particularly when the pandemic comes in, the world becomes chaotic, and the world now is in a mission to find out its balance again. How do you make a chaos into something which is meaningful? I think it's an exercise of the university and everybody else in this university. Yeah. So looking ahead, I think it will not be a nice picture. There will be a lot more crises coming in, just as we thought the endemic is coming on. Suddenly there is another new name that we need to be familiar with, the Omicron, the XBB, the Kraken. All these are names that is thrown at us, and we do not know much about this. All we need to do is to be vigilant, and to be vigilant is to find our balance and harmony again. And how do we do that when we are not told and educated to do this? And I think this is a bigger picture that we are trying to paint and see where we can find the balance given the context we are in today. And the whole lecture is about looking for and finding out the balance so that we can be in harmony with ourselves, with our Creator, with our environment, with our fellow human beings. And that is, just, I think, the secret of how we need to find the future as far as education is concerned. Now, everybody keep on saying that education is important. We agree with it. I certainly agree with it. But after being in education for almost half a century now, we found out there are a lot of meanings to education. So which one are we talking about? Yeah, we talked about education being a part of the economic push. We talk about education being a savior of humanity. What is it we are talking about? Yeah? And this is where Uncle Emiretus comes very vividly into my mind, because he knows what education is all about. And he keeps on asking me, what are we doing about education? And I have no answers for this. Right? So which one of this education is something that we need to decide now. I think there's a time to decide moving forward, where do you want to take education? In other words, where do you want to take life and human beings at the same time? It is not just about us, it is not just about the university, but it's about everybody else. Yeah? And certainly, I think we know, as far as UNESCO is concerned, as far as the frame of the world is concerned, we've been keep on reinventing words that mean something to education. In 1972, I think there was this word, learning to be, which is supposed to be what education is all about. Learning to be later on become one of the 4 pillars of education as far as UNESCO is concerned. And learning to be is about learning to know about yourself, or who we are, how do we interact with other people, knowing the goods and the bads, knowing how we actually can put things in the proper balance and perspective again. But unfortunately, learning to be is not one of those pillars that we actually cherish in the university. We cherish about learning to do, learning to know. Learning to be and learning to live together, which are the 2 other pillars, are not even within our sight as far as education is concerned. So we have talked about this in 1972, almost 40 years ago, but there's nowhere to be seen. And now we keep on talking about something else. There's a treasure within that talks about the other pillars. Yeah? And in 2020, this is the news Director General of UNESCO talks about learning for people, planet, prosperity, and peace. This is something we are familiar with when you talk about sustainable development, how things have been broadened up. It is not just about a country anymore. It's about a planet, it's about people, it's about equitable prosperity. And at the end of the day, it's about how to live peacefully. Again, the context of balance and harmony becomes an issue that we need to deal with. Yeah? So therefore, UNESCO, I think, since 3 years ago, has been talking about the futures of education. I'm taking some of these, important lessons. And they talk about this, reimagining how knowledge and learning can shape the future of humanity and planet. These are the 2 variables that we need to content ourselves with. Humanity and planet, that means all of us. The Rahmatan lil Alamin that we talked about in IIUM is something which is very relevant. How do you make this work together as far as humanity is concerned? Yeah? And therefore, there are then this process, and I'm happy that we are able to follow these processes. Yeah? There are many then documents and summaries of this 2 or 3 years of work being pushed into the main domain so that we can read them and we decide. I think in the middle of this year we're going to decide what education would be moving forward in the 21st century and beyond. One of that is something that we talk about, thinking of education and beyond, the perspective in education for 2050, right? And they talk about core values should be at the forefront of futures of education. What are core values? Yeah? And this, I think, again, something that we need to come and talk about. What are the core values that we talked about? Is it just the core values of the university or the core values of many other things that we need to get in touch with? Yeah? I was fortunate to be in one of this discussion. It is the earlier discussion in 2021 when we arrived at what are the core values and what is the meaning for this. Yeah? And at the end of November, there'll be another discussion, this time taking the discussion we had to the public at large, worldwide. I think there are 2 million people who are involved in this discussion. The pathway to 2050 and beyond. They gave themselves about 30 years to look at where we will be in the year 2050. And then finally, we end up with the World Conference, and the World Conference talk about beyond limits, yeah? The new ways to reinvent higher education. So when the word reinvent, reimagining, talks about that the whole understanding of education may not be relevant anymore. We need to go into something which is very substantially new. And what is this is something that we need to decide for ourselves. And fortunately, again, we were involved in that discussion in Barcelona in last year, May 20th, where we reassemble some of the thoughts that needs to be debated before we arrive at the conclusion in the middle of this year. So I'm going to take some of this summary and put it into perspective as far as Malaysia is concerned, as far as our university is concerned, and how we can actually make meaning out of this. Right? But generally, I think if you were to go back and see what we have done in the last few years, it's something that I'm not too happy about. Yeah? I remember when I was still a Vice Chancellor, when the Minister talked about, let's talk about Education 4.0. You know, my first reaction to him is that, where is Education 3.0? You cannot have 4.0 suddenly when there is no 3.0. And this 4.0 is actually a mirror image of what they talk about, the Industrial Revolution 4.0, that was, I think, promoted in the World Economic Forum in Davos in 2016, I think. Yeah? And suddenly we jump into the bandwagon, and now we ask people, what is Education 4.0? What is Industry 4.0? Many people will tell us this is an episode that you need to contend with. Because if you miss this boat, you miss everything else. Yeah? But little do we know that 4.0 actually starts way back 300 years ago when you talk about Industrial Revolution 1.0. And then you have 2.0 and the 3.0 and now 4.0. And until you can make this connection, the 4.0 would not mean much to us. Let's take 2.0, which talk about electricity. If the half of this country has no electricity, then you can forget about 4.0 because there's no way you can cross to 3.0 when you talk about computer. And it's already well known during the lockdown where students in Sabah needs to climb trees to get connectivity. So we have not even completed a Revolution 2.0. How can we talk about 4.0? Unless we have a different agenda as far as 4.0 is concerned. So us as academicians, we need to be aware of this. We need to understand that this is a continuum that we need to actually connect with one another, and this is why connecting the dots is important. We can never arrive at 4.0 until 2.0 is completely done, 3.0 is completely done, then 4.0 will come in. Otherwise, we are talking about only a section of the population to get the benefit of what we call the 4.0. Even that, when that happens, I think there are other issues that we have not talked about. When we talk about each of the Industrial Revolution, there are downsides to it that we have never even articulated or don't want to articulate. Yeah? Certainly 1.0 brings economic benefit and the other prosperity that we talked about, materially at least. Yeah? But it also brings a downside, the pollution comes in. The massive pollution from the steam engine and all the other technology that was invented then. It has never been recognized. The climate change that we have today is a 300-year-old problem. It's not it's yesterday's problem. Yeah? As though this is not enough, then we go to 2.0 when you do mass production and all these factories that we build. Adds more into the pollutions. And therefore the pollution becomes an issue that we have not thought of 300 years ago. Now we are trying to solve the problem now. And it's quite impossible to do that. And why? Because education has not taken its place when we do the 1.0 and 2.0 at that particular time. Right? So we thought we now can be a little bit smart and go into clean industry and talk about technology which, which do not pollute as much. Yeah? That may happen. We have computerization. And at the end of the day, we create another side of problem. And that problem is loneliness. And that problem is isolation. That problem is shutdowns. That problem is communication. Right? And now the problem that was outside, when we talk about pollution, has gone into ourselves, within the human being itself. You can deal with the pollution, you can lock yourself up in the house and, and do whatever you need to do so that you don't get polluted. But when the problem is within you, there's nothing you can do. You can lock yourself in the room and it gets worse. And how do we deal with this problem? And now it becomes accentuated when we talk about the 4.0, when we talk about shutdown, lockdown, and all the other things that we've been experiencing in the last 3 years. Yeah? And therefore we moved on, and we see other issues coming on. Though all these gadgets that we've got about, there's an inherent addiction problem in it. There are studies now saying that, many of these things that our kids are exposed to, or if not ourselves are exposed to, are created using the gambling sort of AI, artificial intelligence, right? That somehow or other, when we use this, you get addicted to it. And studies tell us so. That every morning when you have a handphone, the first thing you do is to look at your handphone. And you look at your handphone 300 times a day. I said this to a mother, and the mother said, saya tak timbang anak saya 300 kali sehari pun. Tapi I look at this thing at 300 times a day because I am addicted to it somehow or other. And this is an issue that is not going to come on board. There are already many sort of centers that are trying to deal with this. But these are the long-term issues that we need to understand when we talk about this technology. And now this technology is all over the place. We have got the clouds, and the clouds are all attached to the gadgets that we've got. So now anywhere and everywhere you go, you will part and parcel of that. So when the COVID comes in, then all this sinks in. We suddenly found out that we are trapped in our own devices. We are trapped in our own way of designing what life is all about, what futures of education is all about. Now everybody is talking about online, fine, but that will not be the ultimate as far as I can see. The human being needs to take its place rather than just being online as far as education is concerned. So those are issues, the downside, the downturn of this. We have not talked about it. Now when you talk about sustainable development, when you talk about the 4IR, is 4IR sustainable? There's no work on this. If it's not sustainable, then why do you need to talk about sustainable development? Or why do you need to entertain 4IR when it's going against another concept, another idea that was launched about the same time. In 2016 in New York, the World UN General Assembly agreed to adopt SDG, the Sustainable Development Goals, for the next 10 years to 15 years, sorry, until 2030. Yeah? And it's kind of a contradiction. And when the World Economic Forum in 2016 talked about the fourth industrial revolution, the next World Economic Forum talked about social revolution, because at that particular point they realized that unless we have another equivalence revolution, we will all be, subjected to the technology that we do not want. And these are the discussion that has been going on internationally, but it hardly sank down into our universities. These are all on the go as far as 4IR is concerned. I'm not anti-technology, but I'm anti-technology that dehumanizes people. And that's, I think, the issue that I want to bring forward to you. Right? So just to give you some of the impact then on education, when we talk about the downside and we do not know how to manage the downside. Yeah? And therefore people like Greta Thunberg refuse to go to school, sit down in front of the parliament, Swedish parliament, and say, school is not relevant to my future and I refuse to go to school. And suddenly she created Futures for Fridays for Futures, and she got millions of youngsters to support her. And now she becomes a spokesman for these youngsters. And we don't have our Greta Thunberg in Malaysia. In other words, we are still not aware or not sufficiently aware of where we are going as far as education for the future is concerned. We want to liberate ourselves at one point, right? But suddenly we found we are locked down and at the extreme, right? So how do you bring justice somewhere in between? And justice, to me, fairness, equity, is all about what education is all about. Where do you put this in the perspective of the new education? Right? But just to give you a kind of an insight, when you talk of pollution, this is the kind of pollution that we talked about. Some pictures maybe will help us to change our mindset when we talk about the first industrial revolution. The second industrial revolution will be this, right? And with that, all sorts of other chemicals coming on board, the acid rain and so on and so forth. This is something that Uncle Idris has been talking about for a long time. But we do very little about it because we don't understand it, or maybe we think it is not important enough. And therefore this goes on for another 300 years, and now we've got a climate crisis back to what this is all about, right? And then we try to make amends, and like I say, we go into clean technology, we go into clean technology, and that's the technology that we create. Everything is automated, and this one to me is almost like the university itself. The one in white are the lecturers. The one that you assemble is something that comes out of the conveyor belt. They all look the same, they feel the same, they smell the same. And these are the human capital that we think will help the country. All right? And we become another sort of automatons. We don't think. Autonomy is not important anymore. People are not allowed to think. And the university becomes, the place where it is now another factory that produces human beings for the use of another group of people for their own benefit rather than for the benefit of humankind. So these are issues that I think that we need to grapple with. These are issues that student needs to understand. These are issues that academic needs to understand. And during my time in the 70s, I'm fortunate enough to be educated on this. Yeah, the lectures were very open, and we talked about this in a way that it's not been talked about, I think, since then. Right? And here the statement comes in. Conventional development comprises of education, economic growth and prosperity, driven by industrialization and commercialization, is now recognized to be toxic to humanity and planet. We've been driving this for a long time, and suddenly it becomes toxic to us. Not only us, but everything else on this planet. Yeah? And therefore we strive to have another social revolution. And that social revolution takes in many forms new awareness, new understanding, and this is where I think academia becomes important. We are supposed to interpret some of this. Yeah? So that at the end of the day, we serve the purpose of serving the people of what the university is all about. Without that, I think the university becomes, to me, irrelevant, and we are at the point of being irrelevant now when we talk about the COVID-19. What is education now in COVID-19? When suddenly KPIs are not important, rankings are not important, even numbers are not important. You have got money, but there's nothing to buy because everything is closed down. You've got money, there's nothing to buy because it's expensive. The chicken problem is a problem that we see today. So all this, I think, needs to be put into perspective again when we talk about the 4IR, if you want to talk about the 4IR, or otherwise we need to find a different solution on that note. Yeah? So the reality check is not something which is new. It's something, again, that Uncle Idris has been talking about, but we have ignored it because it doesn't affect us directly. But COVID tells us, yes, we are in a state of inequality worldwide, right? And suddenly the word, all life matters, not just black, not just white, not just colored. All life matters, including the life of the non-human person. And where do you put this in the perspective of education today? We have not been talking about this at all. Yeah? Sustainable development has been there for a long time, but it's not even gone into our curriculum or our discussion as such. So the fourth industrial revolution, then if you want to talk about it, you need to read this book by the inventor or the founder of WEF, Klaus Schwab. And I think the take-home message for me when you read this book is this: the fourth industrial revolution will affect the very essence of human experience. Not the technology that we are so gung-ho about, but at the end of the day, it will affect you the way we have been talking about. Yourself as a human person, your essence of human being will be taken away by this industrial revolution, the technology that we are proposing to help us, quote unquote, right? If that is not serious enough, I think this former genius, Stephen Hawking, talks about the development of full artificial intelligence could spell the end of the human race. Rightly or wrongly, we are not sure, but he is predicting this, and I think evidence are showing that at the same time, if you do not pay attention to what they call the technical singularity, where the technology will overtake us in planning for what the future is all about, when the machine itself can think for itself rather than for the human person. So my response to this, the little that I can do, I wrote my own piece on the fourth industrial revolution, not a big one. But the idea was basically to bring in the dilemma, being a vice chancellor, being a rector, being whoever wants to govern the university. I think this dilemma must be understood. Yeah, you cannot just talk about 4.0 without attending to what is the downside of 4.0. So we talked about whether it's technology-centric or whether it's human-centric. Which one, or is it somewhere in between? That discussion has not taken place. We talk about high-tech and high-touch. Technology is necessary, but how much of it is necessary, how much of it is just crap? All right? And then we come up with another word, this new normal, and what I call the renewed normal. And this is going to be a defining way of what is new for us, or what is to need to be renewed. In other words, the old things are still useful when you want to move forward as a human person. Yeah? So then the cliche, no one left behind. Everybody talks about no one left behind. Your 4IR, no one, what do you call the 4IR, no one left behind. Already thousands and millions of people are left behind. What are we doing about this? Or is it just another cliche? Yeah? So in other words, how do you come into terms between humanity and the planet we are living in? In our terms in IIUM, we have now coined this word humanizing education. Humanizing education perhaps is a way out as far as IIUM is concerned. Now, I'll talk a little bit about that. So as much as the Industrial Revolution has produced another two-ism, capitalism and socialism, in trying to bring back the social balance, as it were, the fourth Industrial Revolution, through many people, will talk about another ism, which is transhumanism. This is another thing that has not been talked about when you talk about the singularity, that the triple civilization of the future will be super intelligence, super longevity, and super happiness. I've met many of these friends of who we call now the transhumanists. One of the friends that I knew has got a Bluetooth already embedded in him. He doesn't have to have a Bluetooth in his gadget, because I think he says, sometimes I forgot to bring my gadget. The Bluetooth is with me all the time. You know, and there are another friends that took maybe about 200 vitamins to make sure that he lived long enough to see what's going to happen in terms of transhumanism. And these are beginning to actually creep into our life. And very soon our youngsters will also be involved in this. How much do we know about this transhumanism? Yeah? And what are these transhumans anyway? And there are already predictions of whether we are a hybrid person. The very essence that Schwab was talking about, how much of us are actually human beings and how much of us are not human beings. How do you live in this hybrid world, as it were? What do education do to this? We have not even talked about this. But this is already predicted. By the year 2050, this whole group of transhumanists will be around. How do you deal with them? We don't even know them. We are not even talking about the spirituality, the human being, the way we understand from a religious point of view. Imagine a transhuman becomes an imam. Read perfectly well because, you know, all the things that have been done by AI, whatever it is, you know, and do the ruku and the tumanina very, very, very better than the ordinary imam. Do we pray behind him? What is the status then? You know? So these are issues that I think will be looming into the future, but we have not even started to think about it. And that's my worry when I come to IIUM. Yeah? Let's just talk about the heart. There's so much of invention and so much of, you know, when you got your angioplasty, they put in a stent within half an hour and you are okay. All right? But that's the mechanical part of it. But when you lose your spirituality, what does it do? Can you put in a stent and bring back the spirituality? When you lose your values, what can you do? And that's, I think, the differentiation that we need to make. Where do we stop being a first-class human being and begin to be a second-class robot? That's the issue that I think we need to sort for ourselves. So there is this technology conversion. I talk about singularity. Singularity means that technology supersedes us. And that point will come somewhere in the year 2050. And then from then on, the technology will take over because one technology is equivalent, quote unquote, to hundreds of brains that we created within our own single brain, right? But now when we add in the other dimensions, and we're beginning to talk about the other human and technology convergence, the hybrid that I was talking about, the transhumanists that we talked about, yeah? Where do you then talk about the whole system, the planetary system that talks about the microcosm, the world outside that we're supposed to understand and we're supposed to be in balance with, yeah? Where do you talk about the microcosm that is our own world? Where do we strike this balance? Because this is the issue now at the end of the day when you talk about balance and harmony. Is education into this? Or is just education about something else beyond our own self, the learning to be that I was talking about earlier? So humanizing technology is one of the themes that we are trying to promote. Fine, there's technology, but how much of this technology serves us for a human being rather than be dehumanized by it? What are the limits and what are permissible as far as that is concerned? Yeah? Because there are already statements of this nature. Maybe Professor Nazalan can help me with this. Yeah? Over time, technology might start changing our DNA. This is what the essence in that shop was talking about. Our behavior, and domesticate humans completely. We domesticate animals now, but suddenly we can be domesticated at the same time. Therefore, the need of the hour is to take a step towards humanizing technology. How do you then make that happen in terms of, you know, managing technology per se? So I would like to go back down and try to piece this up when you talk about education and see how we can humanize education and how humanize technology at the same time. Education, therefore, is essentially, to me, about the state of being for the whole human person made in many parts. You can see that, right? The brain, the hand, the limbs, the heart, and so on and so forth. But this cannot be compartmentalized because at the end of the day, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. We want to talk about the human being in its totality. Yeah? Not a reductionist kind of a understanding of what education is all about. Already in our falsafah pendidikan kebangsaan, this is made very clear that we have at least 4 components of spirituality, intellectual, physical, and also emotional thing that makes a whole balanced person. And that balanced person is what our falsafah pendidikan kebangsaan aim at the end of the day. When the student graduates out of convocation, the question we need to ask, is this student balanced? Not what job he will get or she will get. That is important, but a balanced person will get a job anyway, as compared to the imbalanced one. So individual parts summing up the whole is reductionist, the way we do our education today, not holistic. And this approach, I think, needs to be revised and re-looked into. And therefore, if you're holistic, then you begin to understand how to interact with the community, how to build relationship, how to solve practical problems, how to be pragmatic in that particular sense. At the end of the day, what they want is basically to build a well-being society which is focused on the state of well-being and sustainable living rather than traditional economic parameters alone. Nothing wrong with economic parameters, but it has to be integrated in such a way that it is sustainable and is also focused on the balance that we talked about. So we live on a concept called humanizing education, with the understanding that the cliches that life is like riding a bicycle. If you want to move ahead, you need to stay in balance. If you are not in balance, you will not be able to ride that bicycle, and that's life. If you are not in balance, you will not be able to live a full life. You will get some problems somewhere. And how do you create this balance? And that's where I think the new education needs to come in. So in 2021, Geneva Charter on Wellbeing by United Nations University talks about a well-being society, and they use the following meaning. Creating sustainable well-being societies committed to achieving equitable health now and for the future without breaching ecological limits. That is what, from their definition, a well-being society that produces a well-being human person. And therefore, we want to talk about universities also within the ambits of social engagement and trying to create this humanizing education, as it were. I just want to bring you back to some vision of what we think is happening today. That was before the Industrial Revolution. It's just like the kampong that we used to know. Everything is well balanced, everything was quite pristine, and that people are living in a different lifestyle, right? No pollution, not much if there is any. Yeah? But beyond that, you begin to see the graph changes drastically. People like Azim and Suresh may be able to understand this a lot more. Yeah? You can see this exponential growth coming in after 1950 onwards, which is then called the Great Acceleration. Yeah? And that is all due to so-called the Industrial Revolution, the first, second, and third Industrial Revolution, and building the so-called industrial society that we were quite proud of at one time. Until now, we know it is not all that glamorous anyway. Yeah? So what happened then? The thing that I talked to you about, yeah, and this is what the Great Acceleration is all about. Yeah? At that time, already we are producing another generation. This is the Times issue of May 9, 2013, that talks about the me generation. It's all about myself. You guys are not important. It's all about my world. Your world is not important. And one of the statements that I want to quote here, it says 40% of their studies talk about they believe that they should be promoted every 2 years regardless of performance. Yeah? 40% believe they need to be promoted anyway, regardless of performance. Sounds very similar to what we are facing today. All right? So this is the generation that I think we need to contend with, and this is where the education comes on board again. If this is a generation that we need to deal with and to understand them, how do you make education works for them? Yeah? And I think we know all this other classification of the baby boomers, Generation X, Y, Z, the millennial generation. I don't know what's the worth of it, but at the end of the day, these are the group of people that we need to deal with and understand, and to make sure that they are not part and parcel of the problem for the future. Yeah? Already they are called the generation accelerator. They are the ones who are going to accelerate whatever other things that we talk about, beginning from temperature right down to ozone depletion and so on and so forth, that they have got a stake in. Do they understand this? Do education provide this understanding? Where is it that we are going to engage these people, the likes of Greta Thunberg and many more, I think, to come in the future of education, right? So if this is not done, then I think we begin to see some different negative prediction. And one of the predictions is already done by two very outstanding authors, Noemin Orakesh and Eric Conway. They talks about what they call the collapse of the Western civilization, and they even give a date to this. Before the century is out, the Western civilization will collapse because we are not able to manage the environment they are in, because education is so irrelevant to the future, and because the generations now are not interested in education anymore, because it doesn't have anything to do with their futures. That is a summary of this book. A small book, but it's worth reading if you want to know where we are or where we will be if we do not make any changes in whatever form as far as education is concerned. So that is that's why I think that the disconnect that we need to put in as we move into the future as far as the new generation is concerned, so that the statements can be mitigated somehow, or rather that industrialization and commercialization will not be as toxic as it has been if we do not interfere and make changes in the education system as such. The other words that I think that is now going to be very fashionable is Anthropocene. Anthropocene is another era that will precede the Holocene. The Holocene is about the 12,000 years that we have had, where everything is nice and easy for us to build civilization, and the civilization that we have now. Yeah? But beyond that, now we're going to go into the Anthropocene, where human being begin to dismantle his own civilization, given the graphs and the things that I've talked to you about. Right? And this is now happening. Just look around us. Yeah? Bit by bit, our civilization will be dismantled, and we will go back to the state that we are not supposed to be, despite the technologies, despite the advances, despite the world-class university, despite the many things that we talked about, that we think the 21st century will bring better futures, but it's not going to be if the Anthropocene is not looked after in this particular context. And the evidence are quite clear. I just want to show you some opinions that was made from the many research that's done on global warming, and they find that many of the researchers says that human beings are the culprit. We are the guilty ones. So we keep on changing rules and policies and everything else outside us, but we are not changing ourselves, and it doesn't seem to work. Yeah? So we are the guilty party. We are the one that needs to be hanged. And that's why when the lockdown comes in, when human beings are not active, the animals were enjoying themselves. Yeah? In my campus in Gombak, suddenly we find the bangau from the zoo negara visiting the campus. Yeah? The wild boars are out. In Islamic University, there are wild boars also. You know, the what called the fowl, ayam hutan, all over the place, you know, and they took over the campus for the 2 weeks. That's because we human beings do not exert an active role, and they seem to be enjoying it. All right, so we also got our share of biawak, not as big as the one we've got in USM. All these things, I think, tells us that we human beings are actually a menace to ourselves, to our future. And why is it so? Maybe because the education that we got is not the proper kind of education moving forward. And this is where the Anthropocene comes in, where the balance between the microcosm and the macrocosm is not taken care at all. We just talk about something that is not quite relevant to ourselves. Yeah? And this is not done, and the word sejahtera that comes from the falsafah pendidikan kebangsaan wasn't translated the way it should be translated. So I am quite convinced, yeah, the moment you make the human being a better person, then some of this problem will go away quite automatically, because the source of the problem will be removed. Climate change will be one. I will not belabor into that. I just want to share you this video. Tak ada volume ke? Tak ada volume ke? Tak ada, sorry. Do you have a sound on this one? The video ni? I think this video is quite telling of what we human beings are about. What have I done? Can we go back into... Yep, this one here. Okay, thanks. Tak ada. It's not. It's not on. It's not on the screen. Boleh. Sorry, ada dua video and there's another one also.
Prof, kena.
Ni.
Boleh saya keluar balik?
Ha?
Saya
Oh, gue keluar balik. Ada satu lagi kan lepas ni. Sorry about it. Tak ada sound pula. Dia tak ada sound. Anyway, I think there is a subtitle to this. But this a video produced by UNDP to bring in the idea of what we are missing.
Saya naik volume kat dalam. Saya naik volume.
Okay.
You okay? You need a minute? Cool. Okay. Listen up, people. I know a thing or two about extinction. And let me tell you, and you'd kind of think this would be obvious, going extinct is a bad thing. And driving yourselves extinct? In 70 million years, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. At least we had an asteroid. What's your excuse? You're headed for a climate disaster, and yet every year governments spend hundreds of billions of public funds on fossil fuel subsidies. Imagine if we had spent hundreds of billions per year subsidizing giant meteors. That's what you're doing right now. Think of all the other things you could do with that money. Around the world, people are living in poverty. Don't you think helping them would make more sense than, I don't know, paying for the demise of your entire species? Let me be real for a second. You've got a huge opportunity right now. As you rebuild your economies and bounce back from this pandemic, this is humanity's big chance. So here's my wild idea. Don't choose extinction. Save your species before it's too late. It's time for you humans to stop making excuses and start making changes. Thank you.
Like I said, it's from UNDP. It's not a TikTok thing. It's humanity big chance, I think, is the word that I take out of this. Yeah? So if you were to understand this now, let's just look what's happening around us. And this is the generation that we talked about, the millennials and so on and so forth. And what do they learn? And what do they learn is perhaps what is summarized here on the lifetime thing. Yeah? A question of inclusivity, the question of gender neutrality, about adventurism, about entrepreneurship. All this, I think, has been well pieced out. All right? But how do they learn, I think, is another issue. And we've got the social media now, part and parcel. I've not heard many of this. The Snapchat, Instagram, I think we're quite familiar. The Facebook, I don't have one. But this is how they learn, apparently. Yeah? And not only that, how do they communicate is another thing. All right? My generation will probably talk about, leave me alone if you have nothing to do with me. I want to just focus and reflect on what I do. Otherwise, write to me, or then call me, and then this other generation will talk about email me or text me and maybe other things that we don't even know. But these other generations that are now too vulnerable because they are all hooked up into the so-called machines that they have no control over. In fact, evidence are showing is the other way around. And if that is a state of affair now, then how do education come into picture in a very formal way? That's a question I think that we need to deal with as we talk about the futures of education. Yeah? So if I were to summarize this, I would say the world that we live now is a weird world, and this weird world is something that I have sort of put into an acronym. The weird to me is westernized. Westernized in the context that the Industrial Revolution starts mainly in Europe. The first Industrial Revolution, and in fact the fourth Industrial Revolution also starts in Europe, in Germany. We are just, the beneficiaries, if it's so. It's very economic-centric. Education now is about economic imperatives all the time, especially when you talk about the neoliberal kind of education. It's industrial-led. All the time we are supposed to serve the industry, nothing wrong with that. But when the industry themselves are not right, then why are we serving them for? Yeah? The pandemic tells us the first thing to close down was the industry. And they come and tell us, we don't want your students anymore, profits are not here, and so on and so forth. And suddenly we found that industry is not a reliable partner. We become reputational, obsessed, ranking, and I'm glad the new higher education minister has taken a stand on this. And finally, it becomes a very dehumanizing experience within the context of education per se. Yeah. We're supposed to talk about just numbers, KPIs, right? Everything needs to be numberized. Giving a number, no numbers mean nothing can be done about it. So when you talk about belief, when you talk about philosophy, when you talk about the humanities and social science, that becomes secondary because it's not easy to convert them to numbers like the sciences do. And everything else now will be translated into just numbers and more numbers. Yeah? We talk about no one left behind, but I managed to find this quote here from the person who actually works on the industry and understand this better. And he said this, if you go back, everybody was poor. I mean everybody. The Industrial Revolution kicked in and a lot of countries benefited, but by no means everyone. In other words, no one left behind is just a cliche. Already it's been admitted, no one will be on board. Not everyone will be on board. It's just like, Asia, everyone can fly, but suddenly we find that not everyone can fly. And these are issues that I think we need to come to terms with. How much of this is real and how much of these are just lip service as far as our education is concerned. So the weird world, as far as where we're concerned, we're going to debunk it. We think it is not for us. We want to create another world, and that's what we call the wiser world. A wiser is a word from wholesome. The thing must be seen into a total perspective. It has to be integrated. We'll talk about it a little bit more. Sustainable. It has to be ethical and also equitable at the same time. And it must have resiliency. And that is what is missing in education today. When the students are locked down, half of them or most of them are not able to cope. They are not resilient enough because that is not part and parcel of our education system today. So how do you move this up? Create a wiser and a better world, and how to then create a whole society which we now call the humanizing society of the future. And that is, I think, the general aim as far as we are concerned. How do you then deindustrialize? How do you then move away from the Anthropocene and also become human-centric rather than just technology-centric in that particular aspect? Now, the idea for this, I think, came maybe a long time ago, but we have missed it. I mean, Peter Drucker talked about we are becoming aware of the major questions regarding technology are not technical, but the human question. I showed you the research on global warming, climate change, yeah? Where human beings are probably the culprit onto this. Yeah? But there are many data now coming up, and as early as this year, January, that talks about the meta-analysis of finding loneliness has increased in emerging adults for the last 43 years. In other words, it has been there for a long time. It's just that we don't realize it until the COVID comes in and we find that is another issue that we need to deal with, and education is not up to speed on this. Yeah? And these are some of the statistics just to show you. As early as May 2020, again, the World Economic Forum that talks about the many diseases that we know, the diabetes, the cancer, the cardiovascular, now is overtaken by mental health. 35% of our population. So 100 of us, 35 of us will probably be facing that. And these are issues I think we need to grapple with. Yeah? And again, you can see here, when it comes to mental health, it's the youth that's one that's suffering more than the aged or the elderly as such. And these are the students that are in this university. And how do we deal with them, or is there any room to deal with them as such? Yeah? So, by numbers, it looks good. We find that the mortality of students has fallen from 2 digits to single digit, but the rest are not happening well. Right? 16 trillion on mental health between 2011 and 2013. 35% of the economic burden, again, on mental health. Yeah? 50% of mental disorders develop before the age of 15, before they even go to the universities. Yeah? By the time they go to the university, 75% are developing mental disorders. Right? And suicide. One suicide in every 4 seconds. Yeah? And we think there's only a low or a middle income problem. Now they're beginning also to go into high income countries. So many of these things, I think, becomes an issue that we need to talk about, right? So finally, I would just want to end with this. We are going to celebrate the International Day of Education on 2013, right? And the theme is to invest in people and prioritize research. I think it is a very opportune time to talk about what is it that we want to invest in as far as people is concerned, and what do we prioritize as far as education is concerned. Yeah? And UNESCO, at the end of the day, maybe I will just end up with this, they have got some major key issues from the many seminars and discourse that we've got, have got 4 issues to deal with. One is to take active responsibility for our common humanity. Yeah? The big picture of Rahmatan lil Alamin comes into being as far as the future is concerned. Second, they talk about promote well-being and sustainability. Yeah? These are the things that I've been trying to belabor in the earlier sort of discussion. Yeah? Third is to draw from intercultural and epistemic diversity. Diversity is important, intercultural dialogue is important. Malaysia is blessed with this, but Malaysia is not making good of it. Okay? And last but not least, it's about to uphold and create interconnectors at multiple levels, not just technology, but person to person, human to human, civilization to civilization. These are the 4 major areas that UNESCO is talking about. There are many more, I think, to come. But these are the big themes that I think university can start thinking about. It's not about the things that we've been talking about, but it's about very practical, human, everyday life problem that we need to deal with if we were to move forward. Yeah? So on that note, I think I'll just stop there and to talk about where you think we should be going. There's no conclusion to this, but we need to decide what is it that we want to do for the university to move forward, and particularly for USM. We have talked about the bottom billions, I think, for since the year 2008, when we were given the Apex University, and I'm just wondering where the Apex University now. Are the bottom billions still there, or they've gone somewhere else? And all these things, I think, needs to be put back and prioritized as we move into the future. I stop there for now, and I thank you for your kind attention. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much, Nasri, for your overview on the need to reinvent not only higher education, but also education as a whole, and on the need to humanize education. I think we have time for questions from the floor. Yes, please.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning to everyone here, and especially to our distinguished guest, Tan Sri Zul. Apa khabar di sana? Alhamdulillah. Rivani sends his regards. Sorry, he couldn't be here. He's in Thailand right now. Elisha. Sorry. Okay, sorry. I'm taken in by a certain issue that you brought up about the youths, but you said before the age of 15, you said there's 50% of them reach mental disorder before the age of 15. And I'm very much disturbed. Well, we talk about from where we are at university level, and I see the context of the issues at university level. I also see the context of the issues at the youth level, where UNESCO champion education versus development. The bigger issue stems with the concern of working with the youths. And the thing I see most is that in Malaysia especially, the issue is really, really serious, whether we want to accept it or not, because as we move from where we were pandemic to post-pandemic at this level, I think I'm not sure, I'm not with the Ministry of Education, but I see the ministry is plagued with a big issue of trying to get the youths to focus, to be able to concentrate on being grounded with their life. They are so connected to their handphones, so much so that everyone has lost touch what it is like to have a well-being life. And this is really, really quite critical when you look at the fact that they have to sit for a final year examination recently, which is, for some of them, they are completing it by this week and the next week. But many of them find it difficult to even hold a pencil. They can't even hold a pencil too long. They can't concentrate too long to sit and read. They prefer to read from and get education from the internet. This is alarming for me because I see it daily. My son is at Penang Free School, and this is happening at Penang Free School, big time. And it's happening with the Form 4 and Form 5 as well. I'm saying that a small percentage of them are doing well perhaps, but a bigger portion of them can't even hold a pencil and find it difficult to even write sentences. So this is really alarming for me. So if we talk from the point of view of future of education, or trying to connect the dots and make things better for them, and we want to create new statistics, new systems, new environment, we are plagued with a situation where I can see that the Ministry of Education wants to do something great. They're talking about pentadbiran bilik darjah, which USM has championed a long time ago. But what is happening is they also include the context of importance of preparing for examination. So they're taking away exams, Form 1, 2, 3, and 4, and they say you only have exams in Form 5. But the problem is, they say they still have exam. So when the kids do not write, and they say you have to take exam, but it is, it's confusing for everyone. And what happens is, just yesterday, they sat for 43 pages of science exam in English, 43 pages, by the way, for a Form 1 who has not sat in class for 3 years, and you expect them to write in 43 pages of science in English. And so the school has lost touch in terms of trying to figure out the mental health issues among kids who cannot sit still, and at the same time they're trying to teach in classroom. At the same time there are issues with emotional issues among the among the students, and then they have to sit and write. Not only that, we're talking about how they can have a much more well-being life, connecting with among each other, and the parents are so busy working. They can't even get around to sit with the kids without figuring out what actually school is all about these days. So I'm really alarmed with this. And when you talk about active responsibility for common humanity, I am at my wits figuring this out for Penang Preschool. It is tough. It's really tough. So perhaps some comments from you on that.
Yeah, I think what you say is all true, but the question is whether we have started in the right premise. For example, let me try and piece this. For example, for a long time, when you talk about education, at least as far as Malaysia is concerned, it's about employment. It's about employability. I mean, at least from my point of view as a Vice Chancellor here and even in IIUM, I'm supposed to ensure that 80% of my students get employed. Otherwise, I will not make the cut. You know, there were times when it falls below 80% and the KSU was upset and say, why this is not 80%? Because his KPI is 80%. So can you make this? So I need to work a little bit and show the 81% and he's happy. So we are sort of reinventing the game, as it were. So people, some other universities, which is, you know, younger than IIUM, do better. They got 90% employability rate and everybody else is happy. But when we look at how they define employability, you are an engineer, but you drive a Grab thing, you are considered employed. So there's a tick there. Yeah? So in many ways, we are cheating ourselves. We are trying to redefine education the way it should not be defined. And therefore, the mission of university to me is already not right. Yeah? So for a long time, we are talking about livelihood. But now when COVID comes in, we are talking about life. Livelihood is not that important anymore. You can earn good money, but if you do not know how to organize your life, then you are done. So therefore, I thought education is about how to organize life. It's how to put meaning into life. And this is where I have not gone because there's probably no time. When we talk about the new normal, what is the new normal that we are talking about now? I mean, this word is a very elusive word as far as I'm concerned. New normal is supposed to be wear a mask, sit far away and stuff like that, sanitize your hand, which are all good at one moment, but none of us are in the new normal now, except for a few. Yeah? So what is new to us is something that perhaps is not, that we need to question. So the question now for UIA is basically how to teach students to live. And this is where the community comes into play. Every student in IIUM now will have to do a community project before they can even proceed. They must understand what the community is all about, how to profile the community, how to look at the problem, if possible, how to solve a solution. Every one of them will have to do that, not just the industry anymore. So these are issues that I think we need to decide. And alhamdulillah, when I hear some the minister punya speeches baru-baru ni, and he said this, 5% for community engagement is not enough. We need to raise that. Yeah? Impact factor alone is not enough if you cannot translate that into impact on the ground. We know all this, but we have not been assertive about it. We think we can get away with it just by these numbers and stuff like that. So I think there's a lot of things that needs to be reworked and to go back what education is all about and the purpose of education. That's why I come back to the falsafah pendidikan kebangsaan. Some people say I'm obsessed by it. But if you know the falsafah pendidikan kebangsaan, you will be amazed how advanced this falsafah is all about. Maybe I will give you 5 things that the falsafah talks about. The falsafah talks about the first thing, dia kata, pendidikan mesti berterusan, bersepadu, dan menyeluruh. It has to be ongoing, it has to be holistic, it has to be integrated. And that's what we've been talking about. In other words, what you learn in Standard 1 must apply when it comes up to university. In other words, you build the culture of learning, the holding of the pencil and the counting must start there. It doesn't start when you come in university. And that's where the continuity. When I talked to the minister from Finland and I asked him, how is it that Finland do so well? They kata, our falsafah has not changed for many, many, many years. In other words, whoever comes in and out, doesn't matter, the vice chancellor, the minister, the prime minister, the falsafah stays. Nobody will try to reinvent it the way we've been doing. New ministers comes in, you get a new thing comes up. Yeah. New vice chancellors comes in, everything comes up again. So there is a lot of uncertainty that we talked about. Yeah? So that is one. One is about the meaning of education. Continuous, integrated, and also holistic. These are the terminologies we use now. The falsafah has been there for more than 35 years. We are advanced in that particular sense. We are talking about lifelong learning, which is ongoing. We are talking about holistic education. We are talking about integrated education. The second thing they talk about, we want to produce a balanced and a harmonious human being. Not about employment, not about employability. Insan seimbang dan harmonis. And that's where learning to be, I was mentioning just now, becomes important. And that document, Learning to Be, comes together with the Falsafah Pendidikan Kebangsaan. Falsafah Pendidikan Kebangsaan was released again in 1996. UNESCO 4 pillars of learning, including Learning to Be, was released at the same time. In other words, there's already a benchmark at a global level that falsafah has got some global implication, which we seem to forget and which think is not important enough because we are not a world-class university, quote-unquote. And he says, how do you define seimbang dan harmoni? There are 4 things: spirituality, emotion, intellectual, and physical. 4 benda. Banyak lagi lah, but it's 4 things. But what are we good at? We are good at intellectual, we are good at jasmani. We are not good at emosi, we are not good at spirituality. In the language of UNESCO, we talk about learning to do, learning to be, learning to do and learning to know. We are good at that. Exams, exams, exams. Right? We are not good at learning to be and learning to live together. Malaysia's big problem is learning to live together. Why? Because we do not know ourselves. We do not know our culture. We do not know our values. How do you live with other people if you do not know yourself, and how do you integrate with other people? And these are the 2 things that we have missed out. And we want to bring this back. If you go to the Falsafah Pendidikan Kebangsaan, you need to have these 4. Learning to do, learning to be, learning to know, and learning to live together. Iaitu emosi, spirituality, intellectual, and jasmani. And where does this come from? Dia kata, just like rukun negara, kepercayaan kepada Tuhan. And they use the word Tuhan. They don't deliberately use another God that everybody says, all is mine, is not yours. And that's where spirituality comes in. Just like rukun negara, kepercayaan kepada Tuhan, nobody contested. In education, it's the same thing. You go back to the scriptures, to your holy book, when you talk about that balance. All scriptures talk about balance. All right? And then I think the word comes in. Dia kata, once you do that, then you ada kesejahteraan diri. This the word sejahtera has been banded around. What is sejahtera? I've been asking this for the last 20 years. There's no satisfactory answer. You cannot operationalize the word sejahtera. How can you teach it? Our work is to understand what sejahtera is all about. So people talk about kesejahteraan economy, it's not it. People talk about kesejahteraan politik, it's not it. People talk about sejahtera social, it's not it. Dia kesejahteraan diri, the whole complete person that we talked about. And this is where I think we go back to the falsafah pendidikan kebangsaan. Kerana dia kata hanya orang yang sejahtera dirinya boleh menyumbang kepada dirinya, masyarakat, dan dirinya, keluarga, masyarakat, dan negara. In other words, if you don't experience peace, how can you dispense peace? And you talk about bully. People ask me, why bully? Because these people know only to bully. They don't know what peace is all about. You go to Bhutan, And every week, at least 45 minutes, they must teach about happiness to their children and their staff. You know? So when they talk about happiness, they know what they mean. And they know how to actually arrive at happiness. And in fact, their constitution says the government is here to dispense happiness. If not, the government has no right to exist. If you take that clause, our government has no right to exist long time ago. You know? So we in the education sector must do this. We cannot be taking somebody else's idea and try to plonk on this, because our culture, our civilization, our norms and our values are different. But how many of us are doing this? Yeah? The falsafah pendidikan kebangsaan is something that I think we need to come back to. It, I think, provides the solution if we really are serious about it. It is not a lost cause, and that's why I'm fighting this again and again. It's not a lost cause. We need to come back and understand what education is all about in our terms. It's where the futuristic enough to move forward. It could be more than that. Yeah? I hope I answer your question, but maybe we can have a more discussion on this. But
Yes.
yes, Sila.
Salam sejahtera and good morning to the most distinguished scholar who is unlimitedly celebrated for his immense scholarly contribution for the betterment of the global community, none other than the illustrious Tan Sri Zul. Tan Sri, I'm amazed with your unceasing stamina and persistent quest for knowledge creation as you reach your twilight years, and thank you for your critical sharing, sir. As I know many of your age could have completely abstained from learning or could be spending great time nurturing their grandchildren. Now, your topic of discussion touches on a pertinent and very important issue where a great amount of effort have been devoted to deliberate on the future or futures of higher education in Malaysia. Let's forget about the future projections of higher education. I correctly believe we need to look at the current state of affairs, how our present education ecosystem continue to oscillate on an almost kaput hinge and substandardly shape our future education environment in Malaysia. Now, my question to you, Tan Sri, what is the secret recipe or interventions or strategies that you mindfully think we should humanistically reimagine to revolutionize our higher education habitat so that we can create a sustainable well-being society? To you, Tan Sri.
Can you repeat? Can you repeat?
Now, my question to you, Tan Sri, what is the secret recipe or interventions or strategies that you mindfully think we should humanistically reimagine to revolutionize our higher education habitat so that we can create a sustainable well-being society in Malaysia or for the global community?
I will go back to my first answer. I think there's no secret recipe. I think the recipe is there, but people do not understand it, or people think it is. Malaysia has got a very inferiority complex as far as education is concerned. Our education is not doing well, I will accept it. But that doesn't mean everything else is bad in our education. If I talk about the falsafah pendidikan kebangsaan at global forum, I will share with you. Yeah? And some people say this is mind-blowing. Not many countries have got falsafah pendidikan kebangsaan. Not many countries has philosophy on education. We have got one. But we don't even know how to value it, let alone put it into practice. So there's no secret recipe here. Everybody need to understand the falsafah pendidikan kebangsaan, the way it is crafted. And the person that I last spoke to was the late Tan Sri Wan Zahid. He was one of the architects of this. And to understand why do we come up with this falsafah. By the way, this falsafah started when the Prime Minister, the current Prime Minister, was the Education Minister. Yeah? So I'm hoping that he will bring this back into the realm of discussion. So when you talk about the sustainable well-being, like I say, it's only crafted in the falsafah. You know, the falsafah is very clear. We are supposed to contribute. But before we contribute, we must know how to contribute to ourselves first. And I think this is not happening. This is not happening. And when we look at the me thing, it's about me and myself in a very negative way rather than a very positive way. So I don't know. I think the university needs to decide where you want to go. We can subscribe to ranking which is utter nonsense and pay millions of dollars to do this. But we cannot even look at our own falsafah pendidikan kebangsaan, which is, I think, worth more than the so-called ranking. I don't know how to answer your question, but to me the answer is right in front of us. It's either we're ready to take it and move on and make sense out of it, or otherwise we can go on wallowing in this pitiful state where the education will go down even further. Now the COVID is. So if I can summarize with you this, I look at the pre-COVID education, the way that we have been subjected to, including myself. I'm a culprit of this at the same time. We talk about, I call the 3M. One, we talk about education for manpower needs, that's the first M, right? Now we talk about just training the mind. In other words, we talk about innovation, invention, how to create things, which is the second M. The third M is about how to use machine, high-tech machines. Yeah? So all the technologies that we need to master, we need to have that. And what is ultimately? Ultimately, is how to monetize this thing. It's all an economic agenda. Yeah? So when you talk about money to the ministry, you say, I buy this machine, I can produce another 30 million ringgit, then they say, okay, you buy this machine. If you say, I buy this machine and I can only make a good students like this, they say, no, I want the dollar signs. Where's the numbers? And that has been the discussion all the time, right? Now, we need now to expand this. From the first M of manpower, we need to talk about humanity. It's just not about a cohort of people, about everybody else. How can everybody join in this idea of what education is all about, all right? And when we talk about just the mind, we talk about the heart. There is another seed of learning that we are not taking into consideration. There is, I think, a quote that was attributed to Aristotle that talks about education without the heart is not an education at all, right? Now, Harvard is talking about this. MIT is talking about it. Now, once these two universities talks about it, then we want to talk about it. But education of the heart has been there, part and parcel of our education system before we are colonized. But we never regard it as important because it is not, quote unquote, world class, as it were. Now, we need to talk how does the heart and the mind work together to create a better person. And the third one, when we talk about high tech, we need to talk about high touch, I've mentioned to you. Rather than monetizing it, how do you create humble human person, another H? So I tend to talk about the 3M to the 4M and the 4H. How to make this transition is something that I think we need to do. And this is what IIUM is trying to do. We have now got, let me just do some advertisement for my current university. We've got now called the Sejahtera Academic Framework, which is about humanizing a university for the post-COVID environment. And the university now has been implementing this, and one of the things that I mentioned to you, that every student must do community work, is part of that parcel of that transition. Yeah? Every student now must understand where they are in the context of sustainable development. If you do this project, which part of sustainable development are you trying to tackle? And we have got 7 missions within the university. Which of the mission of the university are you trying to tackle? If you don't do that, then you are not doing what the university wants you to do. We are very targeted in that particular sense to create what the new culture of education is all about. So there is no secret recipe. Don't think that Harvard has got one. Don't think Cambridge has got one. Don't think Oxford has got one. With due respect, they don't even have. Otherwise, how come there's so many people died in the United States of America if they've got the secret recipe? We are doing better as far as that's concerned. Our culture makes us better person in that particular respect when you just look at the COVID numbers. So let's not delude ourselves by saying that we have nothing to offer. We have a lot to offer, but we need to make up our minds what is it that we want to do with it before we borrow somebody else's and make ourselves miserable again because it is not within our own context. If we can do that, I think we probably will be able to open a small window that we can move into. Yes?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum
I think,
warahmatullahi.
1 second. I think Hamdan has has
okay.
a question.
No, I think it's good to hear that there's an acknowledgement that, although I first congratulating you for focusing on humanizing university and hopefully that you are able to build that Rahmatul Alameen. I think the reality is that, as we can see, that the whole pathway of how we have embraced development and development progress is rooted to the last 500 years of secular philosophy and the subsequent rise of industrial revolution. And we can see that the major point of departure comes with society where, you know, the last few thousand years of human history all of a sudden is debunked. And we start fresh with this whole post-enlightenment mind and industrial revolution as a path towards the path that has shaped humanity today. And as a consequence of it, we see it picking up in different ways, in terms of how climate has come to haunt us, how, mental health is coming to wipe, the human mind, and the crisis is just all around us. But what I don't see maybe is that the path towards going back to where the point of departure was, and really understanding the point of, in the sense that how did that human society have progress? Because the way modern history is written, as if that progress happened now, but other societies before us had significant progress and expansion of the mind and knowledge systems and so on. How was it that they were able to do so successfully, and what was the point of departures that existed? Is it purely the case of separation of God, of faith and markets, or is there something more deeper than that?
Thank you, Amdan. I think that's a very important issue. For example, now we are beginning to question even the very definition of sustainable development, although that is a global agenda. The sustainable development, as we see it here, is defined as what is it that we can optimize in the present so that we don't compromise for the future. That is what sustainable development is all about. In other words, the water, the air that we've got now, how can we pass it on to the future generation? That sounds good, yeah? But we are now questioning after 35 years and say, what about the past? Exactly, to go back to that point of departure that you talked about, yeah? Because when we do some research, we go to Bali, for example, they've got this subak system, the irrigation system that has been there for more than 1,000 years, and it's still there, And what is a subak system is all about? Subak system is about three things. They're called Trikita Karana. And what is it? Man and man, man and God, man and environment. That's how they plan their subak system. And it lasted for until now, beginning maybe 900 or 1,000 years ago. We go back to Bhutan, it's the same thing. Bhutan has got this philosophy, I think, 600 years ago, when they talk about happiness, and when they question what GDP is all about, and created GNH instead, gross national happiness. Yeah? And we saw Thailand with a former monarch, very much into sustainable economy. Yeah? And that's why when you go back to this falsafah pendidikan kebangsaan, I'm sorry, the word sejahtera seems to convey the same meaning. In other words, it has been there, and that's the point of departure. Now we have destroyed sejahtera, and we do not know what sejahtera is all about. You can ask anybody. I asked from a literature laureate right to a scientist. Nobody have a clue of what sejahtera is all about. And yet that is the only document. The Falsafah Pendidikan Kebangsaan is the only document that uses the word sejahtera. I cannot find any document, economic document, political document, social document that talks about sejahtera in its original text. Only Falsafah Pendidikan, and that's why I'm very passionate about it. And we trace back with the help of Nasha, I think, from your archaeological department. And you say the word sejahtera is actually from a Sanskrit word. So these are the point of departures, that, if I understand you right, that we need to go back. And suddenly I found that the similar words happen in Africa, the word Ubuntu. In Japan, you have Kizuna. In Sweden, you have the word Lagom. Yeah? In Philippines, they have the word Uknayan. Chinese have got yin and yang. Yeah? And Maori has got another word, Maori. All of these things talk about the same principle of balance, harmony, and coexisting with one another. That is the knowledge that I think we have lost. And the human heritage has got to have got this. It's not just about economy alone. And how do you now, what we are trying to do now, how to connect this? Inshallah, in March, we're going to have a meeting in Japan. How do you connect this human heritage together and say, this is the basis of knowledge for humanity? It doesn't belong to me alone, it belongs to all of us. The terminology may be different, but the conceptualization are the same, basically. So I don't know whether I'm answering your question, but we need to go back and find out what we have done right and bring it forward, and this is what also we are doing in IIUM. 40 years of existence, what have we done right then that needs to be put back, and this is where the Sejahtera academic framework comes in. You know? So if you don't recognize the past, then I think we're going to start with a compromised future, or rather a compromised present. This is not what we are supposed to begin with. So you go back to education, for example. Before the Industrial Revolution, we were not a marketplace as far as education is concerned. It's a different kind of education. You know, cordiality, no hierarchy. People learn from one another, and this hence the saying, you need the whole village to educate a child. So those are issues I think we need to come back to, and it takes more than just science or humanities and social science or religious studies. We need to come together and understand this and then push it forward. And we need to start with our own understanding of what education before we borrow somebody else's. I don't know whether I'm answering you. I'm done. Thanks.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Tan Sri Zul. It's an honor to have you here sharing your thoughts at a foundational level, giving us a big picture. I'm quite nervous actually to ask questions in this esteemed audience, so forgive me if it doesn't come out right. I need to tread this question carefully. So you showed us there are so many issues, right? Climate change, gap, income gap, problems, so many kinds of problems. The more issues that we have, actually the more foundational we have to look down at the root, right? So because once we are able to look at the root, and be able, so hopefully all the issues can be solved. So the most basic things that I think we can think about in terms of humanity and all that is the question, are we created? Is there a creator? Are we a creation? Because if we are not, and there's no creator, anything goes. There's no purpose in life, anything goes. Economic, financial, interest supersedes everything, right? In terms of culture, freedom, you mentioned transhumanism. I don't like trans because it has been hijacked by rainbow people, I'm sorry to say that. But the thing is that the issues are real. Okay? Kids can even choose their gender nowadays in woke culture of the Western world. That when they want to choose at the age of teens, their parents, if they prevent them, they'll go to jail. I mean, things like this, right? So anything goes. If basically humanity is all there is, okay, we are not confined. But if we take the position that we are created, there is a creator, we have a different mindset. And I'm trying to speak about this at the general, respectful, encapsulating everybody, rather than trying to polarize. So, but if we look at it that way, then education should bring in that, realize that we shouldn't be arrogant. You know, we should be humble to realize that there is a higher power that we answer to, that every one of us is connected to that higher power, right? So that we are responsible, we have a purpose. I have a purpose for you, you have a purpose for me, everybody is linked, right? Because if we're not, then anything goes and it's all me, 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 right? So, you mentioned about spirituality is about, you know, Malaysian educational philosophy. To be honest, I don't see that, because we are becoming so secularized, you know, from the Western perspective, that we need to, like, as if like in America, we separate religion and state, right? But you know, it was done carefully, because they don't want to polarize things. So how do we bring, I mean, you are in a position at UIA to grapple with this thinking, because if we, okay, just in terms of scientific facts, right, we know that there are scientific findings that show that we are human, we need to be living a simpler life. Coming back to nature, in the Arabic word fitrah, we need to go back to that. We need to eat simple foods. We need to not live luxuriously. No, one of the evils of the world is riba, interest system. You talk about gaps between poor and rich. The biggest evil is the interest, where the moment you create money from money, you put that money in an unnatural flow from poor to rich. There will be poor. I mean, whatever that you want to say about, oh, we need to care about this. So because we don't admit that we are created, so anything goes. But if we realize that's the issue, no, we need to bring in, no, for example, right, in terms of ourselves, ecosystem of ourselves, are we human? We're not. We are more 50% than us are bacteria inside us, right? So when we eat things, we don't eat for ourselves, only we eat for our microbes. I mean, for example. So based on that science, right? So, and then I think there's a guy, Dr. Michael Pollan says, you know, the summary of all his findings and then about this aspect of life is that we eat food, not too much, mostly plants. So it agrees with all the practices of, you know, religious practices and all that, fasting. I'm going everywhere now. So I just want to summarize. How do we, is there a place in education where we start realizing that this is the biggest fact? I mean, especially in UIA, how do you make this not a polarizing issue? And, I mean, so I'll better stop here. I mean, it's just going everywhere now. Thank you so much.
I think I wouldn't want to go into specific. We go to specific, then until we agree on something, then we're going to create more problems. Yeah? UIA dia punya apa tu is very simple. We talk about rahmatan lil alamin. Yeah? So in other words, everybody counts. In UIA is a university that do not have an Islamic department. I think you have got an Islamic department in USM. We don't have an Islamic department because Islam cuts across everything. Yeah? So in other words, there is no quote-unquote obsession to make religion and our religion alone to be the religion. We take into consideration other people's religion, feelings at the same. Although it's easier said than done because we're dealing with more than 100 nationalities in the university. Right? But the principle is that when we talk about something, how do Rahmatan lil Alamin translate for everybody? Okay, how do, now, for example, the university has built a cat shelter. I think probably the first university. We've got more than 100 cats because we think this is part of Rahmatan lil Alamin rather than letting the cat on their own, you know, and create another kind of manage. Now there's a group of people, the Abu Hurairah Club, that looks after the cat. All right? Now they're thinking of a look after dogs, or whatever it is. But that idea, I think, has gone into the minds of everybody in IIUM, hopefully, yeah, that we want to make sure that we are relevant to everybody. Being a Muslim, if I'm relevant to a non-Muslim, that doesn't make me less a Muslim in that particular sense, because that's the humanity part that we talked about. So on that principle, I think we need to agree, and that is part of education from my point of view. When I go to IIUM, this is something which is new for me. And we talk about Maqasid al-Sharia. Maqasid al-Sharia, everybody, when I talk about Maqasid al-Sharia, people think this is Islamic. No. For us, it's about the 5 elements of human existence. And I talk to the Europeans about this. I don't use the word Maqasid. I say 5 elements of human existence is life, your intellect, your future generation, your wealth, including the resources that you have, and your own belief. And nobody can object to this. Tell me who doesn't want life. Tell me who doesn't want intellectual things. Tell me who doesn't want to look after their future and the rest of it. And somebody says this concept is mind-blowing. But the moment I say it's Maqasid al-Sharia, they say, no, you're going to cut my head after this. I'm not going to listen to you. We have vulgarized our own knowledge. We have vulgarized our own religion. And then that's again our role to bring back what has been misunderstood. Now in UIA, we're going to talk about Islamophilia. No more Islamophobia. Let the other world talk about Islamophobia. We're going to talk about Islamophilia, the love for Islam, rather than the hatred for Islam. Why do you let other people dominate this discussion on the hatred of Islam? What do we Muslims do? So these are the transitions that we need to put into place. And one is a love for Islam, when people know what Islam is all about, and when they don't feel threatened by it, and then there's no reason why they do not want to be friends with you. You know? So I think we need to start with that kind of a thinking rather than the academic way of thinking, you know, are we created, are we not created? That will come. That will come in time, when you are ready for it. Those questions needs to come when you are ready for it. If you are not ready for it, you will not be able to entertain those questions. What we are also interested now, we are trying to look at how the Japanese educate their children. How is it that they can arrange their slippers in a way that they can find their slippers very easily? I got one story to tell you. A Japanese friend of mine came, and he had got 1 hour to spare before he goes to the airport, and visited the Blue Mosque in Shah Alam, not knowing that it was a Friday like today. Yeah? And he put his shoe there, and then he went in. By the time he came out, he couldn't find his shoe anymore, because there were other shoes around it. And he then emailed me. He said, I'm sorry, I stole somebody else's shoe. I need to go back to Japan. I don't know where my shoe was. You know? And yet you talk about Islam as a religion that is whatever you want to say about it, when we can't even arrange our own shoes. You know? So these are things that I think we need to be very practical about. When our own toilets are so dirty, what is it we are talking about? Don't talk about Islam if you are not ready to talk about it. And you are ready to talk about it when you can demonstrate it. If you cannot demonstrate it, you are not ready for it. And this is what we are telling our UIM colleagues. Practice it, show it, and then talk about it. Don't talk about it and then just walk away. That's education. You may get another example is in USM. When I was here, masa bulan puasa, I saw one Japanese lecturer beratur makan. I thought he was a guest, and I spoke to him. He says, I'm namanya Nagao. Lan probably understand. And I remember. He said, Nagao, I'm a lecturer here. He said, I just became a Muslim. My name is Zikrullah. Yeah? And when I left, I keep corresponding to him. I think the last few years, I told him, how are you, Nagao? He says, I'm okay, I'm still USM, but I'm not very happy now because the mosque has been renovated and I can only khatam my Quran 3 times. Dalam bulan Ramadan, dia kata, I can only finish my Quran 3 times. And this is Nagao. Anak dia masuk Al-Mashur, become the best student in Al-Mashur perempuan. Arabic A, Quranic A, and so on and so forth. These are Muslims. What are we doing? These are the questions that we need to, hard questions that we need to ask ourselves. What education is all about. How can Nagao be like that? He's just a Muslim for the last 2 months. And why are we not doing this? What's wrong with our education? So those are the specific that will come the moment you realize what your duty is. And not just talking about. See, so in URA we say let's talk more demonstration. We have finished talking the last 40 years. The next 40 years is to work and show what Islam is all about. If that's what we need to do for the Islamophilia that we want to promote, rather than Islamophobia. I don't know whether I'm just also like you.
Yeah, thank you, Tan Sri. So I'm asking the question in general sense as well, so I appreciate your answer.
Yeah.
I wasn't being very specific.
But let's in the university, let's take hold of education. Don't give it to the parents, don't give it to the politicians. We are supposed to be the experts. And why are we listening to them all the time? We need to listen to them, but when it's wrong, it cannot be right. You know, the word sejahtera, I mean, since the minister is not there anymore, the word sejahtera oleh sekolah, oleh the former minister, sejahtera dia about seronok, E about something, you know. The roh is not there when part of safar pendidikan kebangsaan. R dia is relaxation or something like that. You know? So you don't even understand how to conceptualize the sejahtera, and then you're telling the student, these are the 14 terms that you need to understand. And it has nothing to do with the falsafah. And nobody in the Kementerian say a word. I asked them why. Ini menteri punya. Yeah, menteri fine, but menteri is not an educationist. We are the educationists. And we surrender our amanah just like that. I think we are not doing a proper job. And this is where I must salute, I'm sorry, Professor Sharon. I learned a lot from him when he was the TNC. He was the only TNC then. There was no other TNCs. Yeah? And that's what education is all about, what the meaning of education is all about, and how we should be professing. We are a professor, we must profess something. There's a professor who do not even profess anything, then take the professorship out of him. Call him a confessor or whatever, lah, not a professor. You know? And this is what's happening to our university. And I think it's time to move on, and I hope we can make a decision somehow or other before it's too late.
I think we take one more question before we wrap up. Please.
Assalamualaikum and salam sejahtera, Tan Sri. You were talking about the orientation of education towards the 4M. Would it be right to say that the whole organization of modern education was to serve as a handmaiden to industry?
Mr. Shaw?
Handmaiden to industry, for the economy. That's what modern education was organized for. So there has to be a conscious reorientation towards humanity. And the other point I'd like to make is, you know, the emphasis now is on reputation, ranking, mechanism. But equally important and more important would be the kind of teachers we have. I mean, students now will go to a university because of its reputation or ranking. Not often do you find a student going to school because of the particular teacher or a lecturer. I mean, that is what we are seeking. Even you yourself mentioned the number of people who have influenced you. And this is something we should look out for, that we should have teachers capable of inculcating good values, besides having a philosophy, but teachers who can inculcate good values and be influenced to students. What are your comments on this, Tan Sri?
I don't get the second one. The first one,
No, I'm talking about the influence of teachers. I mean, it's not like nowadays we have students who go to a university because of its ranking or because of its prestige or reputation. They don't often go looking for a teacher. And even you yourself have mentioned the number of people who have directly influenced you. And the education process is important to have teachers who influence students, who guide them.
Yeah.
And that is something that, you know, while we're having philosophies of education, but instruments would be the teachers.
Yep, okay. Okay, the first one, if I understand correctly, so-called modern education, I have very little respect for modern education. To me, modern education is not what education is intended to. When I talk about modern education, I'm very much specific on this neoliberal understanding of what education is all about. Yeah? When everything else is about economic. There's a nice paper on the, what you call human capital and education that you must read, how at the end of the day, education is another economic imperative, that's it. Whatever you talk about, there must be an economic imperative with it. Kalau tidak, nobody wants to talk to you. So we have now skewed education to be another, and that's why this whole idea of human capital becomes a very, very rampant sort of usage of what I think Patlah was the one who introduced the word human capital into education, and now it's everywhere. And I ask people, what is modal insan? Nobody understands what modal insan is all about. They think there's another word that that is naive. It's not. It is not. So we need to clean it up. And I remember we talked to Dato Sri Idris Yusof. We told him and said, please don't use the word human capital in your speech because it means something else. And alhamdulillah, he has not. And even changed. I remember dekat Putrajaya, dia kata development of human capital, dia buang itu, dia kata development of human being. That's what we want to do. Keinsanan itu lebih penting daripada modal yang dikatakan from the economic term. So nothing needs to be clarified quite clearly of what we want to do. And modern education in that respect has, to me, failed. Yeah? Then when you talk about the second question, teachers, yes, teachers is important. Yeah? Now, when I was a student, I was called a penuntut. The word is not used anymore. We call murid, pelajar, or whatever it is. What is menuntut? I will menuntut my guru not only ilmu dia, tapi perwatakan dia, peradaban dia, kelakuan dia. He is my role model. Not only what he knows. His behavior through and through will be what I want to be. And that's why at the end of the day, when the guru died, kita doakan guru ni. Barakah dia kita masih dapat. Now, at 5 o'clock, I can punch my teacher. He's no longer a teacher. He stopped being a teacher at 5 o'clock. You know, and he doesn't behave like a teacher pun. The sexual harassment that you read about, I mean, this is amazing. What education are we talking about here? So, guru ni pun tak kena. Bila guru tak kena, guru besar tak kena lah. Bila guru besar tak kena, menteri tak kena lah. It goes out. Because the fish rots from the head downwards. This is what I think we need to be aware of. We have a school of education here. Are we doing the right thing? And this is why I keep on saying that autonomy of the university is important. I don't care what the minister wants to do, but I want to do it right because I've got a amanah for this. Yeah? And we need to talk about the same language. Here, when somebody gives you an instruction, before anything else you want to follow the instruction, you don't even understand what it is all about. So I think we need to put this straight balik semula, that guru is the perantara. And kita akan menuntut pada guru itu apa saja yang dia akan buat. And dia punya behavior, right, akhlak dia sampai ilmu dia is all that must be framed in that particular sense. The only guiding principle I can say is falsafah pendidikan. Then I can say, go back to the falsafah, understand this. Otherwise, it's difficult to tell them to understand what it is all about. And then we can develop further if there is anything that is not right from the falsafah pendidikan kebangsaan. Hamdan is not here, but Hamdan and friends has developed another model called Sekolah Amanah, the trust school, you know. And the trust school is phenomenal in terms of success. Yeah? The story was when we do the blueprint, dia kata ada transformasi. Masa itu Tan Sri Muhyiddin was the minister, and we are not sure whether the ministry can transform. So Khazanah, if I got it right, kata, okay, we'll give you 100 million, but we want to buy 10 schools from you. 5 from Sarawak and 5 from Johor Bahru. And what is the difference? The difference is guru masanya must be an instructional leader. Maknanya mesti mengajar, bukan duduk di office goyang kaki ataupun mesyuarat je. Dia mesti mengajar supaya apa? Supaya gurunya faham. Guru besar boleh mengajar. and earn respect from that, you know, and then everything will follow suit. I'll give you a simple example where we adopted a sekolah orang asli. 8%, 80% absenteeism. Nobody wants to go to the school. And we were finding out why. And finally we found that budak-budak pergi sekolah tak boleh panjat pokok. Orang asli panjat pokok is part of their life. So we talk to the ministry and say, look, sekolah ini budak-budak boleh panjat pokok. Ada 10 pokok, if I'm mistaken, 7 dia boleh panjat, 3 lagi dia tak boleh panjat. Too risky. You know? And within 1 month, believe it or not, we got back the 80%. Not a secret, nothing magical about this. You understand them well, and not only that, then the mak tanya, dulu anak aku tak mau pergi sekolah. Now anak aku pergi sekolah dah tak mau balik. They go back at 3 o'clock. Because the pokok in school is better to climb than the pokok in the jungle. You know? And the mak come to the school and find out what the school is all about. And eventually the whole community own the school. Buat langsir, buat saprah, although we don't need the saprah, buat saprah, you know, datang sweep the school. They own the school, the community own the school. Ni orang asli boleh buat. Orang yang tak asli tak boleh buat. You know, so there's no magic in this. If only you open your heart and open your doors, I think things will happen, but we are not doing that. And I think it's time for us to think how to do this and to go back to the community. I've got just one more slide, if you don't mind. If I don't show this, I probably will not be able to sleep. I'm sorry, it is not a self-advertisement. This is a statement I made on the world stage. The World Higher Education Conference. We were there, we were invited. And I want to do this as a two-minute summary of what I've been talking about. You know, if you think I'm just talking hot air here, I've done this in Barcelona, where the UNESCO conference is all about. Boleh kita do this, just 2 minutes at your indulgence.
From my point of view, if we talk about the future, we want better human beings. In our case, we call it humanizing education. In other words, how do you train people to be better human beings in trying to manage their world and also the world outside? So we talk about education in that particular context as a holistic education. Many a times we talk about transdisciplinary, inclusiveness, integration. This to me is about how do you create a total human person. And I agree with you in the sense that when we talk about education today, it is totally fragmented. And more often than not, it is about an economic drive. Hence, you have the word human capital, for example. Human capital do not necessarily mean a good human being. And we want to go back to this whole idea, who is this human being? And I think it's already being spelled in many of the UNESCO sort of document. I remember the 4 pillars of learning. We have what learning to be. Learning to be is about creating that human person. In fact, the word that used in human to be is to create a complete human person. And we are very far from creating this complete human person. So this trying to attempt to make this work is to go back. And once you get this complete human person, then it is possible to envisage a complete institution using the holistic sort of approach. The approach must be holistic in the sense that it cannot be compartmentalized. Many a times, I think when we want to make change, we do it piecemeal. And oftentimes it doesn't work because we cannot connect it together. And the approach that we took, or we want to take at least, is to look at the whole institution approach. And the whole institution approach will have to depend on the whole person approach. And this is where I think your SDG comes in, when you try to connect the dots. The 14 dots, the 17 dots, it could be more than 17 dots. We discover this as we go along. For example, in our case, we're thinking of where is spirituality in this? We're beginning to envisage and reimagine the SDG 18 to talk about spirituality because that's the binding sort of glue between us human beings. That everything else fails, spirituality will probably bind us together. So these are issues that I think will bring back to what education is all about once we are able to move the institution in a holistic manner then we can envisage and see whether we can also move the society in a holistic manner. And hence we have the integration between society and university as a whole, no longer two separate things. The university goes on its way, the community goes on its way, and when the pandemic comes, you find this thing gets disrupted very easily.
Okay, thank you for that. I must humbly submit that I really enjoyed this discussion. It brings back old memories, you know. But this is not the end of it. Inshallah, there are more to come. I hope we can work together. And I think we desperately need to reinvent education. And I do believe this university has a lot to contribute. And inshallah, with the help of CAP and the spirit that is left by Uncle Idris, I think we have to make it happen one way or the other. So thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh.
Please join me once again in thanking Tan Sri.